if we can maintain composure and think straight in the presence of stress, then that puts us way ahead. Have you ever heard of the phrase, you can do anything you set your mind to? That kind of sums up awareness a little bit, at least in the context of the set your mind to it part. The rationality we'll discuss for the former part probably a little bit later, okay? So awareness essentially means, the way I define it, awareness means to extract value, specifically extracting emotional and practical value from the stuff happening right now. In other words, if the more we pay attention to something, the more likely we can navigate a situation in the present in an effective way and have that pay out for us now and later. So I want to tell you a story, how awareness helped her overcome, let us call it, a large life event that, well, let's face it, would put most people on their asses. So let me tell you a little bit about Hannah. Hannah loves yoga, and while an active yoga practice can build the skill of awareness, we kind of observe our self-talk and how we interact with our bodies and understand how our body operates in space. We can see and interact with the environment, or how our body interacts with the environment. We can build awareness that way. Hannah had a huge eureka moment that came as a result of more than just observing the way she behaved, but also describing and immersing in it. So we'll get to those probably later, but I consider those three main awareness skills: observation, description, and immersion. So to make it frank, Hannah got canned, okay? She got canned. Hannah lost her job, and really that kind of meant life as she knew it got turned upside down. She lost her position as a yoga instructor at a nice resort because government officials mandated the resort shut down, and they used the pandemic and associated public health issues as their rationale for that mandate, okay, to use some diplomatic language there. So Hannah, with the previous coaching that she got at TCAN and the coaching that she got currently at the time, she did a fabulous job at the outset, okay, better than most people would anyway, although she felt shocked, and then after the shock went away, she kind of felt angry or indignant, as it were. She composed herself and took it as an opportunity to have a rather forced vacation, but a vacation nonetheless. So Hannah enlisted herself in a 10-day silent retreat up in the mountains. I forget where, but however many mountains they use for silent retreats, she went to one of those because she figured that a change in environmental conditions would kind of help her mental conditions, as it were. Okay, so she figured that a change in environmental conditions would help take her thoughts away from all the bad stuff happening and make it easier for her to focus on what to do next. Solid move, a rational move even, depending on the information you have. But about this point, things started to get spicy for Hannah, and a part where I think a lot of us can also relate to it. So Hannah lived in California, and she thrived in environments that had tons of distraction and noise. She lived in conditions that more or less left her in a state of constant distraction from her thoughts and her situation. And when she taught yoga, she could focus on giving proper instruction, and it just left her focus at that point in that time, which does help with awareness, obviously. However, since she did a fabulous job at maintaining awareness at work, when she left work into the real world, so to speak, she had so much stimulation and so many distractions that her thinking moved around too fast to even notice what would happen next. So she could focus on her work when she worked, and then when she left work, her outside environment kept her mind moving to a bunch of other places that kept her from the awareness of other things going on. So she hoped these new conditions would help resolve some of her stress, and she got a kick in the pants instead, okay? So she got up to the silent retreat, and lo and behold, she found out, as a fact, that you stayed silent, and that literal silence conflicted with the chronic environmental noise that she got used to, that she conditioned herself to behave in. And now, for the first time ever, she could hear herself think. Maybe for the first time. The metaphorical silence conflicted with the chronic distractions that she lived in: texting, calling, streaming, social media, etc., etc. Lots of things vying for her attention. And now, for the first time ever, Hannah made thinking for its own sake her primary activity. These conditions provided new and different stimuli, S, and she had limited experience in how to respond, R, to this stimuli, and for that reason, she just defaulted to her normal behavior patterns in different conditions. And most all living organisms operate in that way, humans included. You just go to what you know, even in a different place. And so the outcome, the silence aggravated the stress she experienced. And then she started dramatizing and despairing. It's too quiet. How can anyone manage this? Like really aroused. And I mean that in the technical sense, okay? So it's too hard to deal with this. The people here are crazy. I thought I would love this, but it's awful. So Hannah, who had worked with me, still works with us, okay, for 6 months at the time, remembered some of the skills that cultivated awareness at this point. So she had gotten used to, like, okay, when I start flipping out this way, it kind of like maybe taking a step back would help a little bit. She ended up emphasizing what we now call facts as a skill, okay? Specifically, specifically catching and converting her distorted self-talk. And she also leaned on the gut check. And she used the gut check as a way to determine if she thought, felt, and acted in a rational way. And I'll go and describe those things in a moment. So Hannah started catching herself in her dramatic and despairing self-talk. And once she would catch herself doing it, leveraging the gut check, she considered the rational nature of what she said. Because sometimes we get all worked up and then say stuff, but we actually say stuff that makes sense. And it makes sense to feel bad when bad stuff happens. Now, does it make sense to feel so bad that it keeps us from operating in a way that helps us? Then we want to take a closer look at that. However, it makes sense to feel hassled when we experience a legitimate hassle. If we work ourselves up to the point where we make more problems, then we start to go over to the distortion zone, okay? When she noticed herself saying these things, she caught it. And then she leveraged the gut check. In the gut check, you put a statement or idea or a behavior through a very fast 3-step process that we truncate into logic, evidence, and utility. Does this make sense? Does it align with the facts? And does this help me? And you can break that down further into practical and emotional value. Ideally, you want practical and emotional value at the same time. And we call that utility. So when she would catch herself doing it, she leveraged the gut check, logic, evidence, utility, and considered the rational nature, okay? Because if you check all 3 of those boxes, then we more or less can consider this thing that we have gut checked as rational. And so she gave me this example and we spoke about it. What sense does it make to run away from a beautiful place filled with caring people designed with the very purpose of encouraging me to engage with my self-talk? Turns out she realized it makes 0 sense, okay? She gained awareness that she just wanted to run away from something that frustrated her, which also makes sense. It makes sense to want to avoid something that frustrates you. Having it make sense might deviate from it helping you by confronting it. However, the logic stands in that context. In this context, it made very little sense to run away from a place that got designed to do the very thing she wanted it to do. So that moves on to an evidence portion, now that we got the logic part squared away. What evidence did she have that she could judge this retreat as Strictly speaking, she had 0 evidence to make that judgment, nor did she really do research one way or the other. It just sounded like a smart thing for her to do at the time. So her judgment of came from exactly 0 evidence. Indeed, the evidence she would get comes from full immersion in the silent retreat process. In other words, she would immerse herself in the retreat, observe and describe as she went through, and then at the end, take that evidence and make a determination. But she decided to judge it ahead of time, okay? And then that also kind of, creates a lot of issues of its own. I think we can all relate to that in some way. So she had 0 evidence to judge the retreat as okay? So did indulging in the impulse to run from something she found challenging when she did it for the purpose of challenging herself, and also judged it and having 0 evidence to support that judgment, does that provide her with any practical and or emotional value? You can make arguments in both directions. And so for that reason, I love it in the context of rationality because it depends, the rationality also depends on the context. So the facts as we understand them, it might provide her with tiny amounts of emotional value. Why? Because we can avoid something we find frustrating, obviously. But really overall, does she get practical and emotional value out of behaving with those things as the basis of her behavior? Turns out she realized she would get neither practical nor emotional value. And maybe even her thinking, feeling, and acting, it would start getting more distorted. Okay, she may have indulged the impulse to run away from a challenge, and she more would have convinced herself of her dire need to have the distractions she conditioned herself to the last decade. So to boot, she realized that by indulging her previous distractions, she would sabotage her main objective, to figure out what the hell to do with her life next. So to break this down, Hannah determined that she indulged in distorted and victimizing self-talk. And then when she caught it, she would convert it into a rational belief, or rational self-talk. So Hannah's distortions cultivated her emotional disturbance about the retreat, and catching and converting her distortions into rational self-talk adapted her thinking, feeling, and acting in her new environment. So an example, she gave really personal stuff about the rational self statements that she made. So I will modify them in a way that I would consider them, how do I say this, palatable for strangers, to her in any case, because I have personal information, that really she might prefer, like, must I have all of these distractions? No, I would prefer to have these distractions. And I know that if I confront this retreat in the way they designed it to, it will help me out later. And so she would recognize when she made a ridiculous statement, and she would actually validate the nature of it. Like, I feel bad. Feeling bad makes sense because I put myself in a challenging environment that I want to avoid. Okay, now I can tolerate that. I can tolerate that negativity because it does feel negative, right? That negativity makes sense. I can tolerate it and give myself room to improve. And so really it turns out that you really consider the nature of what you say because it came from somewhere. It came from the environment. It came from something somebody said. And so recognizing where it came from allows you to sort of audit the rational nature of it. They all have some nugget of truth, but we tend to take that nugget of truth and expand it into Mars, expand it into just really, really crazy stuff. So to break this down again, the catching and converting her distortions and irrational self-talk adapted her thinking, feeling, and acting to her new environment. So she appreciated that since I operate in a different place now, thinking, feeling, and acting in accordance to that new place aligns with my best interest. And all this kept her mind in the right position to sort of harmonize opposing things, because we want to stay focused on what we do, and we also want to stay open to new stuff, okay? And this, we want to try and harmonize these two opposites, because if we stay hyper-focused on something, then we lose track of the outside world, defeating the purpose of awareness, okay? Well, if we keep ourselves too open, well, then it makes it impossible to focus on the stuff that matters, defeating the purpose of awareness, okay? So we want to extract value when and where we can get it. So by day 3, she kind of made this fundamental shift that she sought when she went from just tolerating her negative emotions, smart idea, okay? Because she knew that negativity has a temporal aspect to it. In other words, she knew that from working with us, you can feel bad, and that bad feeling eventually goes away unless you do something to keep it alive and make it worse. And that distorted self-talk kept it alive, and it potentiated it and protracted it, made it worse and kept it lasting longer. And so she knew if she could catch and convert that, then the negativity that she did feel, although it made sense, would eventually go away on its own. Does that make sense? Letting yourself feel negative? Yeah, good. The negativity acts motivating. If you encounter a problem, you want to get frustrated so you can resolve it. Now, if you take that frustration and use that as a reason to really work yourself up into acting like a silly goose, then you just create more problems. And so she caught herself and kept herself from making it worse so that she could take that negativity and make it useful. Huge. And I use negativity at face value. If we encounter a problem, you're like a lot of times I consider that a good thing. If you blow your top, then you act silly and make more problems. So I really want to emphasize this sort of line that she kept herself from crossing. She swapped her attention from like, how do I survive this alien planet, to what the hell do I do with my life? Now she could make use of the tool that she could make use of this as the tool she wanted it to get used for. If she tried to do both, she would have gotten neither. If she tried to deal with the negativity and figure out her life at the same time, it would have ended up spiraling even worse. She would have continued to get mad at herself for getting distracted, and she would have caved by convincing herself that she wasted her time. And she would have proved herself correct that she would have waited, because she did. She would have wasted all of her time. And so after about 3 or 4 days, she got over that on purpose rather than on accident, mind you. Okay. And then after about 10 days, she got it all settled out for herself. She emerged like a butterfly from its cocoon, confident, powerful, empowered, purposeful, and all these other positive adjectives people like to throw at situations like this. Most important though, she came out aware. So awareness and the skills cultivating it provide the backbone to this entire process and support the other skill sets of tolerance, or maintaining composure in the presence of irritating conditions, staying composed, because if we stay composed, we can make rational decisions which help us deal with the irritating conditions faster and better and more effective. Sticking to the facts, I can go on forever, but basically I consider tolerance really up there in terms of the practical skills that we can develop. If we can maintain composure and think straight in the presence of stress, then that puts us way ahead. Way more important than trying to resolve stress while stressed. Good luck. Good luck. Tolerance, composure in the presence of stress. And then we have self-regulation, which has more to do with like, do I act in a way that aligns with my best interest? And then we have assertiveness, which more deals with how we interact with other people and really a sense of self, so to speak. So awareness can seem abstract, okay, just like any other thing, until we have something practical to sink our teeth into, like the catch and convert method, like the gut check. So a person that has high stress and lots of misery, they tend to act as if things happen to them. How is all this happening to me? I can't stand it. This is horrible, terrible, awful, etc., etc. As if their entire life and all the problems along with it came as a result of external circumstances. Now, do some external circumstances cause us hassles? Yes, they can. And awareness will keep us from making it worse. So this often comes from lazy thinking, distortions, willful ignorance, ignoring the facts or overlooking the facts, and impulsivity, specifically urges to access or escape, okay? Even when it would cause practical and emotional problems. Where we get this, when our emotions get all riled up and we have general urges to go towards something or away. And typically that broad impulse to go towards or away has a specific context of causing us practical and or emotional problems if we follow through with it, where self-regulation comes in, which we'll talk about as we go on. And so in reality, it means that this person kind of just waits for negative things to happen. They feel surprised and insulted when they happen, response, and then think about ways, often foolish ways, to deal with it. Sometimes even doing those foolish things as the outcome. So in short, I take the position, I will speak for myself, and then I will allow you to inform the decision on your own, that a high misery and high stress life gets centered around trying to get away from bad stuff. And a person that is a low stress and high amounts of joy knows they have influence over how they respond to their circumstances, even if the circumstances suck, because they can. Trying to convince yourself and lie to yourself you have great circumstances when they suck creates problems of its own. Stick to the facts. Even if the circumstances suck, you still can moderate how you respond to it. And so Dr. Kashey considers this a major objective of awareness and the corresponding skills. Really, that you have influence over how you respond to situations, either things that you caused yourself or things that have a majority external influence. So in short, if having a life we experienced as stress-filled and miserable centers around trying to get away from bad stuff, then having more experience to make life worth living centers around going toward good stuff. And I mostly define that as thinking, feeling, and acting in the context of our best interests, of our overall, how we interact, how we behave with ourselves, with other people, and the environment. And so we act in the context of all of that stuff as a whole, because we can act in a rational way and still get a crappy result, and we can act stupid and get a good result. Does that make acting stupid a good idea? No, a lot of this tolerance ends up helping, because we can make a good decision and have a crappy outcome, because chaos will weave its way into everything. So tolerance helps us to manage that. We just get more better outcomes over time, rather than all better outcomes all the time, because that distorts the facts. Okay. Just like acting silly often enough, eventually you'll get a result you like. So to revisit Hannah here, Hannah experienced a monumental shift in her super comfortable but highly distracted life, that what once brought her immense joy had just kind of left the building, like Elvis, so to speak. And so when that happened, her feelings of control just evaporated. They just evaporated. That sucks. And we can allow that to suck. But do we want to allow that to act silly? So the situation created practical problems for her, yes. Okay. Different, like friendships ended up dissolving, her income went away, sucks, looking for new jobs, all sorts of other practical problems. But by dramatizing and despairing and downing herself and making demands, she can take those practical problems and then convert them into emotional disturbances. And so a lot of people might think that this crappy situation caused my emotional disturbance, but it really has more to do with my distorted view of reality. I ended up upsetting myself, because she can take a look at the facts and say, okay, now I find another job. Okay, now I find new places to hang out. Okay, XYZ LMNOP instead. Oh my God, my life is failing. What do I do? Everything sucks. Well, that makes it hard to do anything effective. And then she took it upon herself, as she realized she did that and went to the silent retreat, and here we sit. The situation created practical problems for her, yes, but now she could take a step back and see how the way she interpreted her situation distorted her practical problems into emotional disturbances, which end up creating more practical problems and more emotional disturbances. So these emotional problems in turn, right, they cloud our ability to overcome the practical stuff. We have a hard time operating effectively if we feel enraged or depressed or anxious. Okay, it does affect our ability to behave in an effective way. And so it kind of creates a cycle that feeds into itself, right? Stimulus, response, outcome. If you got a crappy outcome, sometimes that turns into its own frustrating stimulus, and it starts a cycle all over again. And so it created a cycle that fed into itself, and it made it look worse and worse until she finally started to kind of realize she started panicking and then have intense urges to get away from it all. And then she just converted that into a silent retreat rather than other things that we can imagine. Okay. Really, this negativity, like I said, makes sense. She had a life event that caused hassles for her. Yes. Recognizing it as a hassle and tolerating the hassle. Great. Step one. So it makes sense for her to feel concerned and sad, because that fits the facts. Friendships, income, stability, that stuff goes away. Feeling concerned and sad fits the facts. A pandemic hit and she lost her job. And the way she thought about it she started distorting the facts into these crazy exaggerations and like dramatizing and despairing and downing and demanding. It turned her concern and sadness really into like flashes of suicidal ideation. When life as you know it starts to end, well, then you start to think about life ending. That happens to the best of us, some more than others. However, when we go through major life events and we tell ourselves life is over and over and over, you start to think about life over. The feelings of concern and sadness make sense. sense. So to keep it real here, a healthy dose of negativity motivates us to resolve our problems, like we spoke about a few minutes ago. An overdose on negativity, from the demanding, the despairing, the downing, and the dramatizing, it takes the sadness and concern and turns it into crippling anxiety and depression. It starts that sort of emotional inflammation. And that cripples your capacity to resolve the problem. And then it creates urges to run away and sabotage ourselves. So this is what happened. Hannah's disturbed emotions led to distorted thoughts. Her distorted thoughts also led to disturbed emotions. And Hannah's awareness of her distorted thinking allowed her to catch and convert them into rational thoughts. And her rational thoughts brought awareness to the situation, grounded her in reality. She could observe the facts, and that attenuated, a fancy science word for lesson, okay? And that attenuated her disturbed negativity back into a healthy, motivational negativity. Yes, this sucks. I want to make it better. Therefore, I will do these things. Yes, good, okay? Versus, I lost a job. Amazing. I can do anything. Well, good luck getting a job. This sucks. I do want to get a job, okay? So it keeps you grounded in reality a bit. And so overall awareness means attention to and getting use out of the things happening in the present. She could observe the facts. She could describe the situation in a factual way, and then she could immerse herself in doing good in the context of acting in her best interests. So when this happens, we end up managing all of our crazy and chaotic thoughts as a side effect. So a lot of people really, they have this stress over, how do I manage all this crazy thinking and my mind jumping everywhere and all this chaos? Well, we use awareness as a way to deal with that. If we can focus our attention on our best interests, we can observe the facts, describe the situation, and immerse ourselves in a practical solution. Well, that manages our thinking. That manages our thinking. Where we pay attention tends to dictate the sort of thoughts we have. And so by catching and converting and then refocusing her attention, she managed her thoughts. She built awareness. She got value out of those things. So it's about presence in the present, and this way we can improve our chances of experiencing reality and then use that experience to set rational expectations rather than making distorted expectations of reality. Yes, throwing a fit in response to reality, obviously deviating from expectations because reality acts so rude in that way many times. Okay, throwing a fit, are the response, and then creating our own disturbed emotions as the outcome. So awareness means understanding that we have a greater opportunity to align our expectations with reality than we do to align reality with our expectations. Does that make sense? We have a much greater chance of aligning our expectations with the facts than to change the facts to fit our expectations. And by sticking to the facts and catching and converting that sort of self-talk, and I consider self-talk and thinking the same thing in practical circumstances because we think with the same words we speak with and we speak with the same words we think with. So in a lot of times I use those as equivocal terms, or equivalent terms rather, that by managing the way that we speak, we also end up managing the way that we think, and equal opposite. If we manage the way we think, it ends up managing the way we speak as well. So to loop back to awareness helps us to identify when things like that happen, and then we can use the SRO model, stimulus response outcome, to isolate the variables that set ourselves up to behave in this way. And in that regard, we also make ourselves aware of the stimuli that can act as warning signs, the conditions that increase the probability of us acting silly. We can make ourselves aware of those conditions and then act in ways that align with our best interests instead, either by modifying those conditions or tolerating those conditions, or both. Ideally, we tolerate them and use that tolerance to make enough space to modify things. So cultivating our awareness means we use those warning signs to do less dumb stuff and do more smart stuff instead, okay? So awareness gives us the ability to take a situation that would have led us to sabotage ourselves and use it to practice our target behaviors that we want to increase. And in this case, the target behavior that made the most sense for Hannah initially, she wanted to focus on catching her distorted self-talk and converting it into something rational as her target behavior. And then when that target behavior reached its ultimate objective, she then swapped her target behavior to strategizing and planning for the future, one thing at a time. So if we ignore, avoid, or miss out on what happens right now, like if we encounter something frustrating and we want to run away from it, what sort of implications can that have? What sort of outcome arises from just running away from things we find frustrating? Especially when frustration really just comes from new things and things that we have a poor understanding of. So thank you so much for learning with me today. Stay rational. Dr. Kashey out.